I'm gonna hit live now, guys. And I guess the first place to start is for those not familiar about you two and High Performance Training Academy. Let's go. What are the main foundational pillars and principles that High Performance Training Academy represents? What's kind of the mission statement, if you will?
Like I think we've, myself and Brent have sort of come through a large development of education through various coaches, and we've seen along the line a few things lacking, and then definitely in this current space we think there's a large opening for good quality, down to earth education for personal trainers and coaches that really actually enable them to do what they need to do, not just in terms of programming, which is what we'll talk about today primarily, but all facets of training and coaching. And one of the issues you get when you go to courses is that you learn someone else's method or their way of going about things, and then you come back home and then suddenly find that you can't apply that to what you're doing, or you learn principles and theories, but with no actual connection to the practical application of what you're doing. So our I suppose mission statement is to bridge that gap between the the theory and the technical component and the practical component, and make sure that when students leave our hands, that they're in a much greater position, and they're actually able to utilize the skills that they've learned on the Sunday, the next day on the Monday, when they're back with their clients.
I think that's I'm glad you brought that up. Like, I didn't even give context. This conversation is going to be a lot centered around programming, periodization, announcing that new course that we have coming up with you guys. Obviously, there is that's our agenda, if you will. However, for even people like just to listen to it, this conversation is going to be heavily based on those lessons and tips that you can take to program and periodize more effectively, common mistakes, etc., etc. Anyway, Brent, what is your 2 cents on that initial question that I brought up?
Yeah, man. So with HPT, I mean, it's kind of what Dale alluded to is, me and Dale have done a whole heap of education over the years, and we found, especially in the early days, we'd go to a course and we were psyched, like it would be, such a great course, and we'd go, oh my God, I've learned all this new information. But I learned a whole bunch of new stuff, but there was no system to implement it, or I had a whole bunch of tips that I could use for my clients and get them moving in the right direction, and things I could implement, but there was no sort of system, and it was all sort of bits and pieces of different areas. So with talking about the programming, you learn a whole heap of bunch of stuff about programming, but where do you start your client the next day? You're sort of still confused on where to start and what to do and how to do something quickly. So basically we're trying to make it as practical as possible and take all the theory and distill it into a usable system that coaches can use straight away, and also and not just the programming side, from the health side as well. Like with there's a big gap there, I think, in sort of information that PTs can use. I mean, they're not really it's not really in the standard curriculum, things like talking about sleep, stress, obviously nutrition, and managing those things to get them results, because they're obviously the things these days. Just having training nutrition is not enough. There's all these other things that hold clients back from a health perspective. Sleep, stress, digestive issues, stuff like that. So our future courses doing that, and then obviously the big one, the programming. That's half of a PT sort of work is obviously applying the programming. The other half is actually knowing how to program. So just putting that together in a system. We felt like online courses were almost like, especially in the fitness industry, a lot of online courses were kind of like where phones were before the iPhone. They're kind of, we feel like there's so much room for improvement, and it's just not there yet. And we have the capability to teach, people online in this way, and we just feel like, there's just, like I said, you think of like phones before the iPhone. They've come a long way in the last 10 years, and we feel like online courses have that same sort of potential, and that's what we're trying to sort of bring to the arena.
So that's a really good point. So then I think that's so common, right? And even in in courses that we may have in common, that sometimes you do feel like you come away with it. You don't have the system necessarily. You have amazing education information, but you're left having to create a system on your own. So how do you guys think about creating that system? How do you deliver it? What can people expect that system will be formatted in? Excel spreadsheets? Is it plug and play, input data here, this comes out here, something else?
All of what you mentioned will basically in the course. So a main, well, as Brent alluded to, a lot of the other courses in the fitness industry currently, especially around programming, they're simply just a lecture. There's just someone talking in front of a screen or someone talking in front of a superimposed screen, and there's obviously deficiencies with that style of teaching. So we've gone a slightly different route with something a little bit more graphically, incorporating a lot more things like graphs and charts. And I think another thing that's lacking when people teach is the lack of examples. So we're going to be really strong on that and providing examples for as many possible permutations as possible, and then also providing the student with as many additional resources that we can, so that they can use going forward. So like things like progressions, strength ratio tables, stuff like that, and they will be given the actual templates that we use for our programming. And then the Excel spreadsheet that we use is already quite advanced, but in the works is a actual programming software that, as you alluded to, you'll basically just be able to put in your parameters and the program will be spat out. So I mean, that's in the works as well. But as Brent said, when we talk about a system, we want to teach the students the underlying principles and theory behind training, and then bring that into a set of rules or standardizations so that they can incorporate them, and then they have some guiding lines, I suppose, not to exceed for the programs that they write.
Okay. I got a question on that, but Brent, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so like you said, there's obviously the spreadsheets and software down the track and all that thing, but the biggest thing is the system. After you've learned the principles and the rules around the programming, you have the system with you. All you need is a piece of paper or a whiteboard, and you should be able to draw up. And this is the thing, like this is what we do, or what Dale does really well. When we're teaching someone programming, we give them a case study or and just give them 20 minutes and go write 12 or 24 weeks of programming, and just to see where they're at. And basically the goal is with the system is, if you have a pen and paper or a whiteboard, you can be given a case study and write up 12 or 24 weeks of programming, 4 to 8 phases of programming in 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. That's what you should be able to do. So even without this, the spreadsheets and all the other usable tools we're going to be giving in the course, if you know the information and you learn it from the course, you don't even need that. You can just create a program yourself. Like most PTs, if they give a program, they want to put a lot of effort into, say they've got a new client who's an athlete or a general pop client or whatever it is, and they really care about the programming, they might spend a couple of hours making the program, and every 3 or 4 weeks when there's a new phase, they spend another hour making the next phase. So you shouldn't take that long. You should be able to give an individualized program to the client, all their needs. Like I said, 12-week program with 4 3-week phases or whatever it is, done in 10 minutes.
How do you guys expedite that process? Like what tools, techniques, or even ways of thinking do you do to expedite that lengthy process?
So just to give an example, let's say we're teaching strictly on strength. We might give parameters that you'll use a series of exercises, a B series of exercises, and a C series of exercises, and we'll stick to that pattern almost predominantly throughout the whole entire programming. Where if we're programming for hypertrophy, we might have individual phases, or we might teach individual phases that might predominantly concentrate on 5 triceps or 5 giant sets, for example. So even though we're trying to make sure that the student has a deep understanding of the principles behind programming, we also give quite tight parameters so they know exactly what to do. So for example, if we say, okay, you have to program for this this AFL athlete, they primarily need strength and functional hypertrophy. Well, they will know that they'll incorporate that A, B, and C series exercise template across the whole line. So that's done for them already. They don't need to think about that. They'll have a quite tight line of repetitions that they might use for the major compound lifts. So, for example, they might know that they need to stick between 10 and 3 reps over their 12-week cycle for this client, and then they can just undulate the reps in between. So when we teach, and this is something that's quite hard to answer succinctly, but the thing that we do is that we give people parameters, and as long as they stick within those parameters, then they as long as they don't go out, then that's a pretty easy process going forward.
And I was going to say, I just add to that. I suppose the way to expedite it is because when I say client, PTs will spend an hour writing a program. Most of that time is thinking. They think, and then I'll do this, and actually maybe I'll do this. Whereas if you see a case study and know what to do, and you just write it down, like that's what takes 15 minutes. What makes it blow out to an hour and a half is thinking about what they should do, and then going through all the different scenarios in their head and changing things around. Whereas what that says,
not knowing what to do.
Or not knowing what to do. So what that says is that if you go through that thinking process as a PT or a coach, then you don't have a system, because you might be able to write a good program, but if you have to think and go, okay, maybe I'll do this, or actually maybe this phase will be better at this time, and this is coming into this time. Like, you should know all that. Like, you should see a case study and know with the system exactly what to do. So it just comes from we get it through experience, but basically we're trying to distill that experience down, so we're a coach who's only just a fresh coach or only been in the industry for a couple of years can do that really quickly without having to have 15 years of experience to know exactly what to do.
That's so valuable. That is so valuable, because then you get this. We spend so much time. It's a great point. And this is where actually automated machine learning, artificial intelligence comes in. I know it's a separate topic, but it actually solves that problem, right? It's like, well, that's what a system does. And it's like, if you can get the system from people who have already spent the time thinking, but you understand the foundational pillars underneath it, which is critical, then suddenly you can be much more effective and efficient and save time.
That's it. And I don't want you to think too, I don't want people to think that it's just, a cookie cutter thing and you can't have your own coaching flair or coaching, so this, you use your own coaching style with this. So basically we teach you the principles and how to think, and then you bring your own coaching style or methods into it. So it's not like you're just locked into our system, or whatever. It's sort of teaching you how to think and implement it yourself. So coaches can still put in their own exercises or whatever, that's it.
Right. Anything to add there, Dale?
Not really.
Okay.
As Brent said, it's definitely not a cookie cutter program. But the beauty of the system is that even though we've got somewhat tight parameters, it allows you to quickly individualize for every client, and the beauty is in the little details that you change here and there that create the result, rather than having completely different systems for client A to client B, just because you don't have one in place. That's how most people program. They'll client B, they'll use a completely different split. Everything's completely different, and therefore they don't really have a good control over what they're doing.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about then the methods. Let's go a little bit deeper. What methods and principles of programming? I know it's a big question, but sit below how you guys think about periodization. Like, how are we delivering those principles through various categories?
Do you want to explain that again for us?
Yeah. Just what are your methods of periodization and programming? What are the main principles beneath them?
We'll start with programming first. So, effectively, programming is just simply, a set of prescriptions there to create a response. And where a lot of people sort of fall flat is they don't know what response they'll be getting from a certain set rep protocol or a certain scheme. So, for us, the first thing is, let's say, taking on a new client, the first thing is assessing the client. If they're brand new to the gym, the assessments might be quite short. If they're an athlete that needs to peak in 12 weeks, assessments might be a lot longer. So from there, then we can determine a timeline of what we need to do and the responses that we need. So the response might be increases in maximal strength, might be increases in hypertrophy, functional hypertrophy, strength endurance, okay, whatever that is. And then we basically line up the protocols that we know that we use to get those results, and basically slotting them into the appropriate time. So for example, if you need maximal strength, well, you can't be training with sets of 10 to 12 for the major lifts. It's just not going to get you there. Where you're going to be using primarily sets under 5, with loads above 85% of your 1RM. Where if you need strength endurance for a particular purpose, or it might be strength endurance in the external rotators of the shoulder, because we've found that's a limiting factor. Well, we know we're going to be using a lot lower sets, but our repetitions are going to be sort of in that 15 and above mark. You're going to be using below 65% of your 1RM. So it's mainly about aligning the protocols that we know that respond to a certain response, and then putting them into a logical sequence. Now, in terms of periodization, there's 3 things to really consider. We've got fatigue, accommodation, and logistics. So fatigue, obviously, if you run a certain training protocol or exercise for too long, fatigue will then start limiting the results, or the results might actually go backwards. You might stagnate and regress. So therefore, you need to be taking out a certain training scheme or a certain exercise after a period of time, and I tend to generally default to 3-week mesocycles. And then we've got things like accommodation, which is slightly different to fatigue, though they do blend into each other. So accommodation is where the training stimuli stops having the same result, which tends to be a little bit more pertinent to the central nervous system. So again, that necessitates some sort of change. And then we've got logistics. So it's impossible to add in every training system and every exercise that you want to do in a certain training program. There's just not enough time or energy or recovery ability to do that. So therefore, we need to split up everything that we want to do. We need to split that over 3 or 4 phases or whatever it may be, and rotate them in and out to correspond to the fatigue and accommodation that we get from the various systems. So yeah, it's a quite sort of broad question that you've asked, but that's the sort of process that we use, and the thinking that we go about designing a program for someone, and how it looks will vary completely, whether we have a fat loss client, or whether we have a client for maximal strength, or whether we have a client for functional hypertrophy. It's all going to change quite dramatically.
That's great. No, thank you. That describes exactly the type of the conversation, and just a little bit of a window into how you guys program and how you think about your process. Brent, is there anything you're thinking of or you want to add?
Not too much. I mean, I think Dale covered that pretty well. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, periodization, as Dale said, it's just planning of training. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So people often say, especially for general pop clients, you don't need to periodize. Like it's over. Periodization's only for an Olympic athlete. You need to plan out 4 years of training or an athlete. But basically, if you're saying you don't need to periodize, basically you're saying you're going to get better results not planning anything than planning. That's at the end of the day. Like if most people would say if you're going to plan out anyone's training, if you got a general pop client for 3 months or 6 months, most people would agree that if you plan out the training, at least somewhat, you're going to get better results than if you don't plan at all, if you just do things randomly or instinctively. So that's all periodization is really, is just as planning, and it's the basically trying to find the most effective method of planning out a time frame of training. That's basically it.
Absolutely. Random actions, random results. You need a plan,
it.
right? What gets measured gets managed. We talked about it earlier, but I want to now go a bit deeper. You guys have talked about at the start of the conversation where a lot of gaps between a lot of other courses is they don't bridge the gap between theory and practical. So that's one point of difference. What do you think this course also contains that others may lack?
I think a big one is,
even if you guys want to share some of the content. Sorry to interrupt. If you want to share some of the content on the screen, if you happen to have any on your computer in front of you, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think one of the big ones is, and this is something that me and Brent heavily discussed, is that a lot of other educators or coaches, they seem really reluctant to actually give examples out. I don't know what the reason is. So, I mean, along with everything else that's been discussed, one of the big differences is that we'll try and give as many examples as possible, for each theory or each principle that we're describing. So for example, the number of repetitions that you use during a set, like it's dictated by a few different things. So, where you are in the training phase or the training macro cycle, what your training age is, your distribution of fast to slow twitch fibers, and how well you can recruit those fast twitch fibers, and a few other different factors. So when we're explaining that principle, for example, we'll give you an example of the number of repetitions you would use for an advanced client, for an intermediate client, a beginner client, or for a client that has primarily a large distribution of fast twitch fibers, medium, slow twitch, etc., etc. So we'll try and provide as many examples as possible, because sometimes not knowing or actually not have seen an example is just a limiting factor for a lot of people. They don't know what they don't know, and if just that example was provided there just to lock it in to the student's mind, it can make a big difference.
Sure. And then I suppose other differences, I think, with this course, one, it's going to be somewhat more interactive. So like Dale mentioned before, a lot of online courses is basically just a lecture, recorded lecture. Whereas this will be interactive. So you'll be, actually, clicking forward and back. We'll have extra, we're going to have extra, I suppose, information that is optional to look at. So for example, you can go through just the core content of the course and do that, but we'll have extra. So like if people want to go deeper on an area, we'll have like a learn more section, and you don't need to do that to pass the course, but if you want to go deeper, you can. So it'll be like, imagine if you get a textbook, if you go to uni, get a textbook and it's got all the core, but then there's little extra sections there that you don't have to read, but you can, that give you better understanding. So things like that. Also having proper assessments too is another one me and Dale are pretty big on. We want to have some real assessments, not just like, a few multiple choice answer questions. We want people to pass. It's you want it to be somewhat of an accomplishment, and actually know, you have to know it, quite well. So have a real quality assessment, even as far as, we're talking about having the students complete actually do a case study, and we'll mark it like, they have to write a 12-week program or something like that. So that's the big difference, I suppose, is, that's if you go to uni or get a diploma, you do proper exams and assessments. Online courses, you just do a few multiple choice questions. So, if you want to have quality learning, you have to have quality assessments. So we want to include those as well, which most online courses don't have. So that's a few other pointers there as well. That's
great, because that's going to create now a depth of understanding rather than just memorization, right?
That's right.
Now, I assume those will be some case studies, right? So you'll actually get the students writing out programs, and then they'll be marked. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's what we're shooting for. Absolutely.
Now, to move on, for you guys, what assessments do you guys are your go-to gold standard to initially dictate your programming?
Well, I mean, there's varies, depending on the level of client that comes in. But for the absolute ranked beginner client, the assessments are quite small. Basically, because the programs that you would use with an absolute ranked beginner client are somewhat of an assessment in themselves. So basically, if any issues come up in the very first session of exercise, then you'll have to regress. Previously, especially probably 4 or 5 years ago, I used to run a lot of assessments with all the clients, and especially with the ranked beginners, we just found the same things were coming up. So we used to run an overhead squat, we used to run a clat test. For the males, we'd run a chin up, an external rotation test for the humerus, length tension tests, for the upper and lower body. And 99% of the times, the results were exactly the same. People would have poor stability in the knee, that have really internally rotated shoulders, and poor external rotation of the shoulder in terms of strength. that have poor abduction of the, the humerus, the pecs would be really tight, that have adhesions in the subscap. They couldn't do a squat, and it was just all the same, regardless of who we're testing. So, from there, I basically developed an initial phase 1 program, which focused heavily on alleviating those structural balance issues, and that's something that gets used with the majority of the clients that I see, and also too, with the students and the businesses that I consult with, they're highly recommended to use that and tend to adopt that approach. But when we're dealing with more intermediate and advanced clients, especially when they have a sporting goal, we might look to things like strength ratios between the agonist and antagonist. So, for example, we might choose to do a 1 RM test for the bicromial flat bench press, maybe the standing overhead press, and then also strength tests for the scapular retractors and presses, as well as the external rotators of the humerus. So from there, we can determine someone's weaknesses and strengths, and then determine what will be the limiting factors. For the lower body, this might be the comparison between the front squat and the back squat, which generally should be an 85% ratio. So the front squat should usually represent 85% of what the scores in the back squat will be. And then either side of that will represent strength and weaknesses, either in the knee extensors or the hip extensors. And as we get into more sporting applications, we use things like the eccentric deficit test and the explosive deficit test to basically determine how that individual is making those scores. So, we might have 2 people with a bench press of 100 kilograms, but one of them might be really strong eccentrically and really poor with stretch shortening cycle. And then the other person might be very good reactively at the bottom of the lift, but have very poor eccentric strength. So when we start going into athletic population, the amount of tests get a lot bigger, but it's just to find out information that will dictate our programming going forward.
Awesome, that's great. Brent, do you have any other go-to assessments?
Look, the only other one really would just be, obviously, if your Gen Pop, would be obviously your body composition, or for any client, body composition assessment. Obviously, if that's a goal, you want to assess that. The ones Dale mentioned, or your strength and structural deficits. When it comes to health, the other assessments are, I suppose, that I tend to do, especially for Gen Pop, are the health related ones, and they're just sort of questionnaire based. So I have a pretty detailed sort of health questionnaire, talking about sleep, stress, circadian rhythm, like what time they're getting up, what time they go in bed, energy levels. They're sort of things. Even things like and things you pick up, like ask them like digestive symptoms, bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation. Obviously what their eating habits are like. So all those, sort of questionnaire based assessments on top of, so you've got the ones, the training based assessments that Dale just talked about, which is going to actually tell you about the physiology of their training ability, and then on top of that, you've got the health based assessments, which is just the questionnaire based thing. They tell you, if they tell you they feel like shit all the time and they can't sleep and this and that, well, then that's something that you definitely want to address, because it's going to greatly affect their results in the gym. So I think for PTs, especially dealing with general pop clients, and all clients, because obviously if they're an athlete or a Gen Pop, they're still going to deal with that. You want to be asking those questions, because if a client's only sleeping 4 hours a night and then you wonder why they're not getting results, if you asked the question at the start, you would have solved the problem, or at least known what's causing the problem.
That's so true. You have to, you don't want to find that information out 3-6 months down the line. Otherwise, you're right. 3-6 months behind.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're paying good money to get coached, to get results. And we know, anyone can tell you, if you're only sleeping 4 hours a night, then you're not going to get results. So if you don't ask the question, you're leaving it on the table, and you're just assuming, that they're doing it right. So they're important assessments as well. I think a lot of coaches leave out. And
that equivalent question is relevant to every body system, gut, bloods, like what's happening biochemically. It's more detailed, obviously, but even just your habits, your nutrition, like it's critical. And to back up a little bit, Benny DiCioccio, former student of ours, I'm going to coach now. He wanted to know, and this is obviously good to bring up now, How long will the course take, and when will it be available approximately?
So barring any mishaps, it should definitely be available in the first quarter of next year. Look, in terms of total hours to complete, look, it's probably going to be between the 10 and 20 hour mark. That, and again, like Brent said, that depends on how far off you sort of go off track. So we've got the sort of core, the core presentation, and then we have a whole host of other different things that you can sort of go into. But again, it depends on the aptitude of the student. But it's definitely not a, some of the other courses that you can buy online are just a 2-hour lecture or a 3-hour lecture with a few multiple choice answers. This is quite a lot more extensive than that, and a lot more extensive than what we originally envisioned. But needless to say, there is going to be subsequent courses. This will be our level 1 course, and our level 2 courses will go into things like strength, hypertrophy, fat loss, sport specific training. But regardless, just completing this level 1 course, I think, very safe to say will put you, above 99.9% of all personal trainers in Australia, if not the world.
It's a big call, Dale Hansford. I like it.
Yeah, I'm big call for a big man. And it's going to save you so much time, money, and your results are going to be accelerated. So instead of just looking at and staring at a bit of paper, wondering what to write there, as Brent said, it's going to be a much quicker process. You're going to have systems in place, and also too, because you're not doing random programs here, there, and everywhere, you'll actually be able to look back at the end of 6 months, compare what you've done, because everything will be standardized, and you'll see what's worked and what hasn't worked, instead of having so many variables. It's hard to tell what's going on. So that's where we're at the moment. So hopefully that's answered this question.
Absolutely. So I want to back up on assessments a little bit. Brent, you mentioned body composition. How do you guys recommend people measure and monitor body composition, especially and nutrition, especially when a lot of people have psychological hang-ups on taking photos of themselves, measuring and weighing their food? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so I suppose, when it comes to body composition assessments, I suppose it is going to be tailored to the client a little bit. I mean, I think it's probably unwise to just have your favorite one and just try and stick that into everyone. Like say, it's like our preferred method is with the calipers. Like we use a 12 or 14 point site caliper assessment, which is quite. But the thing is, there's pros and cons to it, right? Pros are it's quite accurate if you're good at it, but downside of that is you have to be well practiced at it. Like me and Dale have been doing caliper skin folds for at least 10 years, and you just get a feeling like these days me and Dale will pinch a site and we within 1 or 2 mil we'll know what it is just because we've done it thousands of times. I'll pinch someone super early, I can go, okay, it's about 14 mil, and it would always be within a couple of mil just because we know. And so you just you have to have the anthropometry, right? Like, and know the sites, know the body landmarks. So that's, for a given PT, it's worth learning that, but they might not want to use that right out of the gate. And then, like you said, the psychological hang-ups. So, I mean, the most basic is just, you can start with scale weight. If someone's especially if someone's quite overweight, if you've got a client who's 40 kilos overweight, well, then scale, while not good for some populations, can be good for them, especially, you're not going to want to pinch someone who's quite overweight. You've obviously got, tape measurements. Pictures are good too. If someone's comfortable taking pictures, that's, I mean, at the end of the day, if someone wants to look better, pictures are, the most, sort of best representation of that, because it's how they look. It doesn't matter what the calipers say. If someone looks better, they look better. But at the same time too, I think we want to encourage clients, like we've heard in the past, you don't jump on the scales, every week, you're just going to set yourself up. But, for these psychological issues that some clients have. But I think a part of the problem is the education too. So, talking to your client and explaining to them, well, to get the best data, we need to weigh you multiple times a week and take an average of the week. don't expect the scale to drop every time. You know, it's that proper communication education that stops them having these psychological hang-ups. You know, like I know people like, you know, especially it's common with a lot of females, they'll hate jumping on the scale. But if you educate them on the reason we're doing it, the reason we're jumping on the scale is not to see that you've dropped weight 3 days a week. It's to get an accurate representation of where your weight is over a week. And we can't do that weighing once a week or once every 2 weeks because it fluctuates so much day to day. So we need to weigh, you know, every second day or whatever it is, you know, to get an accurate representation. So I suppose to sum it up, one, it's going to be dependent on the client, you know. So you've got a few options. You've got 4 or 5 options. You've got calipers, tape measurements, weight, pitches, and then, you know, if you want to get something more accurate, you can do a DEXA scan or something like that. I don't usually recommend. We bought one of those in-body scanners, you know, the impedance, and we just found that the accuracy wasn't there. You know, we spent a lot of money on it, and you know, we don't even use it.
Well,
really
was the
anymore.
validity there, or was the reliability not there? Was it consistent and inaccurate to other things, or was it inconsistent?
It was inconsistent. So,
Oh, that's
like,
not
you
good.
know, no, you could jump on and be 19%, jump on 5 minutes later, be 17.
Oh.
You know, like just
Get a
not good
refund,
enough.
bro. What is that?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So not good enough at all. So you know, they're really popular because they're easy to use, which is great. They give you instant data, you know, and they give you quite a lot of information. You get a whole printout with all this information. But, you know, I mean, they may have their place, but the leaner someone is, the less well they work too. Because when someone's leaner, they're having smaller jumps, you know, in progress each time. So it has to be more accurate, you know. Whereas if someone's, like I said, if someone's got a lot of weight to lose and they're losing 2 kilos a week, well, then it's going to show up on the machine because it's a big move. But if someone's going from 12.6 to 12.3% in a week, well, then, you know, it's got to be very accurate to be able to measure that. So the method's got to match the client and the coach's, I suppose, you know, the coach's skill as well.
Totally.
I do have something to add to that. So this is a good little trick and one that I've used, especially for satellite clients when we haven't had access to you know, reliable caliper measurements, is that you will generally find that if you've been using hypertrophy protocols or functional hypertrophy protocols, a 5 kilogram increase in your major compound lifts across the body will usually correlate with a 1 kilo increase in lean mass.
Really? Is
Yeah.
that anecdotal, or do you see literature?
Look, I haven't seen literature to suggest it because, you know, to my knowledge, there's no studies out there to back that up. But this was something that was first exposed to me from Charles Poliquin and something that I've found to be incredibly reliable, you know, myself. So
Can you say that again? A 5 kilo increase in load correlates to a 1 kilo jump in body weight?
In lean mass. So
lean mass.
So for example, if you deadlift, you squat, you bench press, you chin up, go up by 5 kilograms. Okay, you should overall have a 1 kilogram increase in lean mass. So that's assuming you're using hypertrophy protocols. If you're using, you know, relative strength protocols, so like you know, reps under 4 or 5, you know, this doesn't ring true because the strength gains are more neurological rather than structural. But if you're using the hypertrophy protocols, it usually rings true. Just to put into context, you might have somebody that weighs 100 kilograms, and you know they've got you might have a baseline measurement, and you know they have a lean mass of 80 kilograms, so they've got a body fat percentage of 20%. So for example, they might be able to bench press 100, squat 100, deadlift 100, chin up 100, you know, which would be just 1 rep body weight. If they can push all those values up to 105 and their body weight stays static, so you can assume they've now traded 1 kilogram of fat for 1 kilogram of muscle, and now they're 81 kilograms of lean mass and 19 kilograms of fat mass. So they're now down to 19%, and they've gained a kilo of lean mass. And then to also put that into perspective, you know, if you want to put 100 kilograms on your bench, you know, generally you'll have to gain 20 kilograms of lean mass. So if you can bench 100 at 80 kilograms, you'll probably have to be 100 kilo before you can bench 200. If you use primarily hypertrophy protocols.
It's tough because it's a general guideline, but, you know, relatively as you creep up in lean mass, strength doesn't always correlate linearly. Or do you find this has a linear correlation, or do you think it's more dynamic once you get to the top end above 1.5, 2 times body weight and strength?
what throws it out is the training methods, and usually, people that are at that strength levels, well, they're not training primarily with hypertrophy protocols, and that is the caveat with this. So they're doing, sets of three, they're doing triples, they're doing, doubles, where the response is primarily going to be in the nervous system. So the structural increases aren't going to be there, and the consequent increases in lean mass aren't going to be there. So that sort of throws it out. And it's not something that I use, I use over super long term. It's probably more so for that short term situation when I have a client that I can't get calipers on, I can't get reliable caliper readings on, which is something I've had in the past. It's just very easy to know that, for example, if their bench has gone up by 5, but their scale weight's gone up by 1, well, then, we can assume that the fat mass has stayed, relatively the same, and then lean mass has gone up by a kilo, and that's also, a really good way to, just make sure the client understands what's going on, so they don't lose confidence in the system. But in terms of those top end athletes, look, it does get thrown out, and of course there's anomalies and there's biomechanical issues there as well. But look, it's a pretty solid formula just to work off roughly.
Nice. I like that. Brent, you don't happen to have any other little formulas like that, do you, Brent? Or guides, correlates?
When it relates to body composition,
Even strength programming.
Strength programming. Look, when we use lots of formulas, like Dale mentioned before, some of the testing, like in the assessments, you can use, for example, to work out, roughly whether someone's, like he talked about before, the explosive deficit or eccentric deficit. You can do similar, really basic one. If someone's, more fast twitch or slow twitch, you can, the 1 rep max, you can do an 85% test. So if someone's, for example, someone's 1RM is 100 kilos on the bench press, you go to 85% of that, so 85 kilos, and see how many reps you can do with that weight. And basically, if they do more reps with that weight, you're seeing whether they do more or less, whether they do more fast twitch or slow twitch. So, if someone's quite fast twitch, they won't be able to, get as many. They'll be closer to their 1RM. Where if someone's quite slow twitch, they might knock out 12 reps with a 85%. So it should be about 5. Like on average, it'd be about 5. Yeah. About 5 reps. But if someone's like, you get it, for example, and females, and beginner clients tend to be. So if you get a beginner client, they're going to be able to get a lot more reps for, at that 85% because they're not neurological efficient. Whereas someone is quite strong, like if someone's a really well-developed strength athlete, they might only get 2 or 3 reps on that 85%. That's another method you can use as well, to see where someone and what to focus on too. Like if, you can, because basically with training, especially as you make progress, as someone's more advanced, you just got to identify what the current weakness is. Do you know what I mean? Like it's identifying, where someone's weakness is. And if you identify that and then, target your training adaptations to the weakness, well, that's going to give you the biggest boost in progress. So it's just another little assessment. But I mean, Dale has, dozens of little tricks like that, which we'll be going over in the course, and in the future courses as well.
Most definitely. I want to shift to the most common mistakes that people make in their programming that makes their program just ineffective or more inefficient than it really can be. Where are people really losing out on potential gains and results?
There's 2 things, in my opinion. So the number one is not respecting structural balance, or not respecting the weaknesses of the body. So not knowing how to assess strengths and weaknesses. So just as human beings, we tend to gravitate what we're good at, which is only good for a very short period of time. But your weak points will always be your limiting factor. So for example, if you can bench press 100 kilograms, but in a seated external rotation, you can only use a 2 kilogram dumbbell. Well, those external rotators as antagonists will hold your progress back. Where if you bring those external rotator strength up to 8 or 10 kilograms for the external rotators, then you'll find that your bench press program might have increased, or it'll have a lot more space to increase. So that's another one, and this applies all over the body. So for example, a lot of coaches forego any sort of knee flexor training. They don't use leg curls, but they'll squat, they'll half squat, they'll do whatever, leg press, blah, blah, blah. And they train the knee extensors, but they won't train the knee flexors as well. So therefore, through inhibition, the body will stop the progress of the quadriceps. Also, it will destabilize the knee because we've got varying length tension, discrepancies through the soft tissue. Also, eccentrically, the hamstring won't be able to decelerate the knee when it's going into hyperextension. So just as an example there. So number one would be discrediting structural balance, or not looking at structural balance, or just not looking at the weaknesses at all, and just training one strength. And then number two, I would say, is actually changing exercises too much and too often. And this pertains more so for the major compound lifts. So the major compound lifts, by default, they have very high fatigue rate. So you'll find you'll fatigue from them, really quickly. If you do 10 sets of 3 on the bench press, very, very quickly, fatigue both in the nervous system and through the muscular system is going to prohibit progress. However, they have very low rates of accommodation as well. So what that means is that, even though the body might be fatigued of that movement, it's not bored of that movement. So you can drop that exercise, but you can also bring it back very, very quickly. So we'll see that in some of our programs that we usually cycle in and out some of these major compound lifts quite frequently. So, I mean, the rep range, I don't, even though a lot of people mess that one up, they'll train sets of 8, sets of 3, sets of 5, sets of 12, sets of 2, in a really incoherent manner. Like, in my opinion, it doesn't matter as much as long as they're training hard at all those rep ranges. But if you, for example, one phase is flat bench, one phase is incline 30 degree, one phase is overhead machine press, one phase is dumbbell decline press, you're never coming back to those same exercises again. All you're doing is gaining and regressing. You'll gain for 3 weeks or 4 weeks on the bench press, and then that'll just stagnate, and you're not training that again. Like learning French, learning Portuguese, learning German, learning Italian. Like, by the time you get back to Portuguese or French, whatever the first one was, you can't remember any of it. So so that'd be the 2 biggest mistakes. So not addressing the weaknesses in isolation, and just varying those major compound lifts far too much.
And those will be covered, like those addressing those. Well, tell me if I'm wrong, but interpreting those musculoskeletal length tension deficiencies, you guys will touch on that within the course?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it'll all be there. How to run the tests. There'll be all the norms will be there, and
Beautiful.
In some of the documents as well. We'll go through that a little bit more in depth in the strength and sport performance courses to come later, both online and in person. But it'll be definitely there in the level 1 course. Otherwise, you don't have any idea what to concentrate on. Like, if you've got no assessment of what's strong and what's weak, you've got no guiding light of what you need to train. So, I mean, you're just shooting in the dark. So you absolutely need to assess, work out what's weak. If in doubt, train what you think is weak, but also make sure those major compound movements are rotated in and out frequently.
Got it. Brent, anything you want to add there about common programming mistakes?
Look, I think Dale covered it pretty well. I'd probably say, there's something similar, and that's something I used to do as well. Firstly, just making program to programming as it's due. So you do a 4-week program, whatever it is, and then you sit down and do the next one. Whereas you should really have a rough idea. You should be able to do a bunch, have a flow at once, because your mindset. So you start program 1, you do it, then you write program 2 in 4 weeks, write program 3 in 4 weeks after that. And you haven't really sat down and thought about the big picture all in one go. You're just sort of doing it as you go. So that's probably a big one. Rotating lifts in and out too quickly. I used to do that. I'd take a lift out completely, put it back in, or not come back to it for a few months, and didn't really have a system for removing and putting in new exercises. Like with those compound lifts, as Dale said, you only need slight variation to avoid the accommodation, or and a continued progress, like a change in grip, a change in foot position, a change in bar, that's enough. Taking out squat completely, whether you could do a change from a squat to a safety bar squat, changing stance, add a heel lift, or just changing rep range. You can leave, like a back squat is something, you can, almost train continuously and make progress at, just by changing the loading variables. So, reps, sets, tempo, rest, and then changing, like I said, the bar or foot position or something like that. But you can still squat, if that's something the client wants to improve, and it's obviously, it's going to contribute towards their goals, then that's something that you can improve a long time. Whereas we make the mistake is, we've got to vary it all the time. So, put it in, take it out, and then put it back in again, different. And as a result of that, your long-term progress is going to be less. Whereas other exercises, has to suit the exercise. So, if you're doing, I don't know, like biceps and triceps, or isolation exercises, they're ones that you will take out completely. If you're doing the same, you're not going to do the same variation of bicep curl every phase. You're going to have a lot greater variation. So as Dale mentioned, those big compound lifts, small variation. Whereas this smaller isolation stuff, well, then you can take them out completely, or have a more variation for those.
That's it. That's I've spoken to a lot of people, and that comes up commonly in programming, like that consistent methodology and principle. And it's really interesting to hear, because people may not have heard it before, but that is very common, and it's very practical and useful, and you're just going to become a more efficient human athlete mover by implementing it that way. Now, to move on for you guys, when we talk about total volume, right? Total volume in a week can be dictated by many factors: the goals of the client, the stress demands, sleeping, recovering, what phase they're in. But if you guys could summarize, how do you define the total volume working set range per week or month, depending on the category that they want to work on hypertrophy strength? Like for some people, their hypertrophy range for total volume is 80 to 120 working sets per week, and they modulate in between there. Do you guys have your own version of that?
I think that 80 to 120 total sets is around the mark for hypertrophy per week, although it's especially when you're training twice a day, that can blow out quite a lot, although you can't do that for very long. In terms of I don't tend to look at it over a week and then sort of add it up, basically, because I definitely like to keep the programs as similar, I suppose, in terms of total volume as I can. So each day of the split, I really like to keep the unless we're working on a weakness or we've got a really big strength discrepancy, I like to keep each day or each workout similar in terms of volume, just so we have predictable recovery.
Do you typically increase volume over a phase or keep it static, or it depends?
So I'll just give an example. So for me, in my eyes, there's two ways to look at it. Total, well, there's three ways. I mean, total volume can be in sets. Total volumes can be in total reps, and it could be in total tonnage. And those three things can be completely independent of each other. So if you do 120 sets at or above 85% of your 1RM for major compound lifts, well, that's an incredible amount of high intensity work, where you can accomplish 120 sets with a giant set program incredibly easy. The total tonnage is going to be way higher, and the total amount of reps is going to be way higher with the giant set program compared to the maximal strength program. So there's a few different ways of looking at it, but in terms of the number of sets, I usually like to keep the number of sets static for each mesocycle. So that would be, we might do the A series lifts might be 5 sets of 5, and you'll do 5 sets of 5 in the first workout, the second workout, the third workout, and then if it's 4th, 5th, and 6th workout, they'll all stay the same generally. But what we like to do is that we obviously need progressive overload, so we like the load to increase. So from the first exposure during the mesocycle to the last exposure of the mesocycle, we need that that load or the peak load or even the average load to increase. The only time I change the amount of volume is that when we're training the same program twice per week. So we might have an upper and lower body split, and they get repeated twice per week for a total of 6 times each over a 3-week period. In which case either the third
The
or
exact same program?
Yeah, so you might have a lower body program and an upper body program. You might do the upper on the Monday, lower on the Tuesday, have Wednesday off. Okay, you repeat again Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off, and then you come back again to your next week. So you're training the same lower body program twice, same upper body program twice. And I tend to use this for clients that I'm either not seeing regularly, and it's a little bit harder to keep track of 4 different programs. For them, clients that are between the 0 and 6 or 0 and 12 month mark in terms of their training, or if we've got a specific lift that we need to bring up, we just need to hammer home that frequency of training. But in that case, when I'm training that same program 6 times over a 3-week rotation, I'll usually drop the volume on the 3rd or the 4th workout by anywhere between a 1/3 and 2/3. So that's the volume. So that's the amount of sets. The intensity still needs to be high, so that the effort and the load still needs to be high, because we still need to achieve some sort of super compensation or some sort of response. Just dropping the weight doesn't do anything. It's not contributing to the end goal. And usually for the Gen Pop client or for the hypertrophy client, that gets dropped by about a 1/3. So you might go from for example 30 total sets in the workout down to 20. On the other end of the scale, if it's a fast twitch athlete in an explosive sport, that might get dropped by 2/3. So you might go down from 25 sets to 12 sets.
Now, just to clarify, you're doing this. So the first 2 workouts of the week, upper and lower, they'll be the higher volume, and then the last 2 you repeat, they'll be lower.
So let's say week 1, Monday, Tuesday, full volume. Thursday, Friday, full volume.
Oh, okay.
So that's session 1 of 2 of upper, session 1 or 2 of lower. The Monday and Tuesday of week 2, okay, they'll be dropped in volume.
Oh.
Okay, and then we'll go back again.
So high-low.
Yeah. So it's 100, 60%, 100, 40%, depending on the client. And then what you'll find is that the session after the deload in volume, okay, assume you've done it right, you'll get an increase in both peak load and total tonnage.
Now, it's kind of this balance between managing stress, minimum effective dose, maximum recoverable volume. What if the client can manage to recover from a higher total volume and just keep it consistent? Is that also on the cards?
It is on the cards, except I just don't see it happen too much. Like if you're training hard, which you should be, 6 workouts of the same type over 3 weeks, like somewhere along the line you're going to need to back off. Unless you're using low volume protocols. Like if you're doing between 20 and 28 sets of really hard work for the lower body and the upper body using proper good lifts, full range lifts, you'll need it somewhere along the line, generally before that 3 weeks. Now if you're using an A and a B program, for example, so you do upper A, lower A, upper B, lower B, so these are different workouts, A and B workouts, then you generally won't need that deload, because you're only exposing the body to that same workout 3 times over 3 weeks or 4 times over 4 weeks. And just that longer, that longer time between exposures just means that the fatigue doesn't creep in quite so quick.
That is a very interesting little methodology there.
I mean, there's other ways you can go about. There's other ways you can go about it too. You can go, in terms of volume, you can go 100, 80, 60, back up to 100. There's other variations where I've gone 40, 60, 80, 100, back to 40%. But when you're changing volume that much, it's you got to be really, you got to be a really competent coach to keep an eye on things, because even though your peak load might have gone up, or your total tonnage has gone down, you don't quite know where the response is. Is the response going to be on the peak is going to be on the peak load side, or is it going to be lesser response because your total tonnage has dropped? Where if you can keep things relatively constant or as constant as possible, you'll get pretty predictable results.
Absolutely. That's I think it's when you change variables too much and you have too many moving parts, it's hard to establish causality of what established what change and result.
Yeah, so if for example you have people that add sets rather than add load, well, the problem is if you've had supercompensation in the in the muscular system, for example, your muscle fibers have got bigger and stronger, and then you use the same load the next time, well, effectively you'll actually use less motor units because the motor units you have are now stronger. There's no need to use the same amount of motor units for the same load. But adding on an extra set while you got more damage to a lesser number of motor units is just a really hard thing to keep an eye on what's going on. Where if you just keep a static volume, just add that 2 to 5% increase in load, generally you'll be hitting the top of the curve on the supercompensation graph in terms of central nervous system adaptations, muscular adaptations, metabolic adaptations, and just stressing them a little bit more to counteract their increases, and it's just a really predictable advancements that you get.
And this, I mean, on top of that, this is where we can actually, to counter that, you can modulate load and relative intensity. So you could go down in reps in reserve, and then the total volume could also in conjunction increase, although now two moving parts. Another method, maybe you don't agree with it, but I've seen work as well.
Yeah, look, you can go down in reps in reserve, but I mean, again, the problem is that you're then somewhat you're from a set to set perspective, you're under training compared to where you were. So assuming there's been an increase in preparedness or strength, you're either now able to recruit more motor units, or if you've been doing hypertrophy work, your motor units are now bigger. If you're using more reps in reserve, you're now training at a level which is comparatively under what you were. So it's now you're now having to find some way to get a response, whether that's with with more volume. It's just a really unpredictable way of getting a response, where if you keep the reps in reserve the same, or you decrease the reps in reserve and increase the
that's what I was initially alluding to.
Like it should be somewhat harder along the line. That last session of the mesocycle should be as hard as it can be. You're closer to your RMs normally, and that's fine because you're into the next cycle. If you blow out in terms of fatigue, well, that's not such a big issue because you're not you're not repeating those lifts again, or you are repeating those lifts again at a different intensity, so it's not so much of a big issue.
Awesome. That's a great little back and forth there.
It is. Look. It is a complex. It is a complex thing, and it is something we go over in the course, and it's made a lot easier with with things like graphs and charts. And we do take a long time to really explain this and make sure everyone understands this.
Brent, you were patiently sitting in the back there. Do you have any thoughts that popped up you wanted to? Or are you good?
Look, nothing to add to that. Look, Dale explains all those concepts very well. I wouldn't be adding anything if I added anything to that.
Oh, good, man. Well, I want to be respectful of time, but also want to be thorough and comprehensive. If it's available to you guys, are you able to share a live little case study here, or any type of little snippet of what people can expect?
I could chuck up. Yep. I was going to say, Dale, was it what one of the lessons that'd be good to show here, or
might possibly be a little bit sort of troublesome just to screen share that, but perhaps Alex might be able to give us a bit of a case study to sort of go through and show
like
exactly
talk it through.
Yeah. If you want to do that, I mean, we can show sort of how our minds work, and then what people can expect.
Let's go through a common one, because there's going to be a lot of personal trainers who maybe won't have access to athletic populations. Let's go through like one of the most common ones, okay? And I'm doing this on the fly, so forgive me. Gen Pop, classic case, reduced pain, more sedentary lifestyle, drop fat, and build sustainable habits within their physical literacy resistance training life. Do you want any more details I can add on?
Yeah. As much as you can. Yeah.
Okay. Wants to drop 5 kilos of body fat within 3 to 5 months.
Yep. So they're like 75 kilos and they want to get to 70, or something like that.
Yep, I think that's fine. They're over fat. They're not obese or overweight. They're over fat.
Yeah.
And their sedentary lifestyle is leading them to joint pain as well, like back pain, knee pain. Anything else? Previous history of exercise is inconsistent, only walking, hasn't resistance trained in over a year.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, dropping 5 kilos of fat in 3 to 5 months should be a piece of cake. For any PT, that is. Like assuming that the nutrition hasn't been spot on, and obviously wasn't, because they wouldn't be in the shape that they are. Nutrition is obviously going to play a major part, in going forward, and usually, at least in the initial periods, just simply cleaning up the diet and then adding in some specific supplements can almost deal with that 5 kilograms of fat. For example, if you've got someone that they're sort of binging out on the weekends, or they're just got inconsistent, like especially if they're a female, we tend to see inconsistent eating patterns. Females tend to be very low in protein and not to have breakfast.
Yes.
So if we can just clean those things up, it tends to make a big difference. Supplementation wise, and we have a slightly different, I suppose, approach to supplementation than what a lot of other people do, and that we are sort of the opinion that we want to give the client the very best possible service and advice and health outcomes that we can possibly get in the shortest period of time. So any deficiency that a client will have, or we generally won't be reserved in trying to alleviate that. And everyone does have deficiencies or physiological issues that can at least be helped with supplementation. But the main ones that we recommend are some sort of digestive help, whether that's hydrochloric acid plus digestive enzymes, or just digestive enzymes, especially if they're on the low end of the protein intake. High levels of omega-3 fatty acids from fish oil, things like multiple chelates of magnesium and zinc, which nearly everyone is deficient in, and a broad spectrum multivitamin and mineral. So just by implementing them, and especially the high dosages in fish oil that can ramp down inflammation and do a whole host of other things, can make a big difference in terms of the body composition of the client. Especially with omega-3s, we see a nutrient partitioning effect where the client can actually use the liberated fat for extra fuel and energy for protein synthesis. That can be really handy and actually get a trade-off effect between fat and muscle. So they can be really handy for that gen pop client that comes in with the painful joints and or whole host of other sort of issues that the supplementation can sort of fix, or at least alleviate straight off the bat. And then we can take a lot more progressive approach, I think, with nutrition, because with nutrition, it's a process. People just don't do it like that. It takes them a little bit of a time. So supplementation can sort of wipe over some of those weak points to begin with. But in terms of training, so we've got just that the sedentary person, they don't have a massive fat loss goal, so we don't need to do anything crazy in terms of training. A lot of PTs fall into the trap, and so when someone comes to them, they hear the term fat loss, and they need fat loss, they need to give them these outlandish programs, these tiny short rest intervals, or they just end up doing aerobic work specifically. In this case, we've got a fairly conservative fat goal. We don't really need to go too hard in terms of training to create that fat loss effect. It should be relatively easy. So again, we need to respect structural balance. So depending on the amount of times the client can train, if they can train 3 to 4 times a week, they'll get an upper and lower body split. Usually, if they can train 2 to 3 times, they'll get a whole body split. But we'll be using exercises like the front foot elevated split squat, some sort of leg curl variation, tending to favour things like lying or kneeling leg curls. I don't like the seated leg curl too much. A single leg curl variation, some sort of very low heel elevated step up variation like the Peterson or the Poliquin step up, just to target a low portion of the VM. Some sort of incline hip hinge or back extension variation. So my favorite there is a 45-degree back extension with a 3-2-1-0 tempo. So that's 3 seconds down, a 2-second pause in the bottom, just to strengthen those hamstrings in that lengthened position. And then 1 second on the way up. And then some sort of seated calf raise, again with a pause in the bottom, just to favor flexibility adaptations in the ankle. And then also some sort of stability movement for the abdominal. So if it's a fully untrained client, things like a plank will be enough for them, especially for the initial period. If they're a Gen Pop client, they've done planks at home, for example, there's no need to go down that route, and we might use things like a side plank, and that would be just a normal sort of lower body program. In terms of the upper body program, we'd have things like a one-arm standing dumbbell press. So that's with a contralateral stance and a hand supported on some sort of object. We'd have a single arm pull down. We'd have something like a 45-degree dumbbell fly, just to favor the lengthening of the pecs there. I'd usually have just a one arm or a dual arm seated row, usually with independent cables if we can get our hands on them. And then we'd have something for the scapular retractors. Initially, my favorite being a 10-degree prone fly or prone lateral raise, especially with a pause at the top, and a seated external rotation. So along the line, we're favouring unilateral exercises, basically to square up any discrepancies we have between the left and the right side. We're favouring lengthening of the joints. We're favouring dumbbell and cable work, just to allow independent movement, and just squaring up and alleviating any of those deficiencies that we've mentioned are common a little while ago. So things like the hamstrings, the external rotators, the scapular retractors, stuff like that, just to prepare the body, square it back up, alleviate any weak points, so they can push on into more advanced weight training down the line. So from there, if you do your work well, things like the split squats, the step ups, the back extensions, it becomes a really, really easy ride into things like barbell squats, because they've gained the necessary flexibility and strength to be able to execute those movements well. See, a lot of PTs, they have these huge drawn out progressions, wall squat, kettlebell squat, blah blah blah, something, and 6 months before they get someone to barbell squat, and it's absolute bullshit, because it shouldn't take that long. And just because they haven't targeted the necessary tissues or the necessary qualities that they need to be able to do these full range lifts. And like on average, I have a client barbell squatting in 4 weeks. It's because we're attacking the ankle joint, attacking the knee joint, attacking the hip joint, just with those necessary movements to facilitate the strength and flexibility that they need. So that would be the starting program, and then it will just progress from there. Going from mainly unilateral to more bilateral. The repetition range would usually be in the 8 to 12 rep mark, just across the board for the first phase, with something that just standardized 60-second rest periods in between those those exercises. And we would usually favor antagonistic supersets. So the first two would be the split squat and the leg curl, so they're antagonistic supersets, 60 seconds in between each. The step up and the back extension, again, quad and hamstring, and then the calves and the abs, the press and the pull down, the fly and the row, and the external rotator and the scap retractor. So we usually use these A's, B's and C pairings of antagonistic supersets. We use them quite a lot. And then we just follow that basic structure, and it'll just become slightly more intense in terms of the percentage of 1RM. The reps might undulate, or they might keep fairly static across a 12-week period. But for someone like that, the regular client, that 5 kilos should come off well before that 3-month mark. Usually maybe in the 6 to 8 week mark, if they've done everything properly. And it's not uncommon for a client that comes in, like the client that we've got here. They might come in, they might be after the 12-week mark, they might be able to squat full squat they might be at 60 to 70 kilos for 6 or 8 reps if they've done their work properly and they work hard.
And the frequency in training, we're talking minimum 3 times a week.
Yeah, so if they can train 3 or 4 times per week, I'll usually use that upper and lower split. So there's that upper body program and the lower body program that I described, and they just rotate through each upper lower upper lower. If they only train 2, maybe 3, depending on the client, I would just combine the A's and B's of that program, or whichever the most useful out of those 2 programs, and they'd be combined into one single program that they would just repeat.
I'll ask you to repeat the same program 3 times a week, 2 times a week.
Yeah. Look, if it's incredibly weak female, it would tend to just be the same whole body program twice a week, or 3 times a week. If generally if they're a male and they can train 3 times a week, I'll still have that upper lower split. Yeah. Whole body routines that are whole body A, whole body B, they can sometimes be a little bit problematic, because invariably you'll have some overlap between the whole body A and the whole body B. If you're doing them with a highish frequency, sometimes it's a little bit hard to predict the recovery. You might have 2 quad exercises in whole body A and 2 quad exercises in whole body B, and just the frequency and all that doesn't sort of match up quite so well compared to if you just pulled it to a lower and an upper body split. You know exactly where you are, exactly how many days to the next training bout, and then you can deal with it there.
That's a great, very detailed explanation of that right there. Brent, would you do anything differently, or add anything, or change anything?
Look, I probably wouldn't use anything different. I think that's why me and Dale are paired up so well on this project, because we do think very similarly with a lot of this stuff, and we bounce off each other a fair bit, especially with the program. We've learned a lot off Dale in that regard. The one thing I would say is Dale bring up a good point when it comes to progressing clients to those fuller versions of lists. So progressing a client to the back squat and progressing them to deadlift. I find that I see PTs, they're in one of 2 camps. They're either getting them into the full versions of the lift straight away. So, get a complete beginner client with all, the standard structural limitations that we see, internally rotated shoulders, poor hip mobility, blah, 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 getting them to back squat straight away. Or they take the opposite approach, which Dale mentioned, is they'll have this extremely long progression, and like I said, it'll take them 3 months before they get them to complete the lifts properly. I think the biggest thing is having the progressions done well. It shouldn't take long at all. Like I said, 1 or 2 programs of your split squats and your Poliquin step ups and those movements to alleviate those imbalances. You should be able to get them to get them back squatting and deadlifting to those fuller versions of the lifts, sooner rather than later. Probably, after in phase 2 or phase 3, you should be able to do that. So it's just something to be aware of. I think is, especially Gen Pop clients, they're probably not going to be ready to do those barbell lifts straight away. But at the same time, you don't want to be waiting 6 months either. So, and trying to, make sure they're, perfectly, balanced. You should be able to progress them pretty quickly. Phase 2, phase 3, you should be able to move on to those lifts. So I think that's probably just an important point there for PTs.
Very good, guys. We've covered quite a few bases, but before we finish up, is there anything either of you two would like to add that we haven't covered, that you wanted to add? Any common parameters or methods or principles within programming that you want to touch on before we finish, or just generally about the course?
I'll say too, we talk a lot about programming. Obviously, so we've got this programming course coming up, and then which is the base, and then we've got like Dale mentioned, fat loss, hypertrophy, and sports performance. Also, the other thing, because I suppose the sort of philosophy that we're coming to with these courses is what is the biggest gap that PTs have. Basically, trying to create the courses that I wish that I had available to me when I first started. So programming is one. And then the other course we've got coming on that we're going to be developing alongside this will be released shortly after, sometime in Q1 next year as well, hopefully, is our health-based courses. So basically what I was talking about before, so those assessments I was talking about, sleep, stress, digestion, circadian rhythm, gut issues, all those sort of things. For me, like, why did I go learn those things? Is because they were the biggest gap that allowed me, the biggest bottleneck I had with making progress with my clients. So, I suppose what I'd be saying is look forward. We'll be having those courses come out. I think that'll be really important for PTs. Basically, same thing. We've got, we created this system for programming to allow PTs to write a program in, 12 weeks of programming in 10, 15 minutes. Well, we want to do the same thing with the health-based stuff. So allow PTs and coaches really easy, applicable ways they can implement questionnaires for health-based stuff, and then how to actually have fixes. Because like I said, if you have the client that is inflamed, stressed, not sleeping well, it doesn't matter how good your programming or nutrition is, they're not going to move the needle. They're not going to make progress. So so we've got that. That's a course we're really looking forward to bringing out as well. And I think, the two of them together, if students can master those two things, is, looking after improving the health aspect of their client and also doing program right and doing it very efficiently, then it's just gonna take them to another level of the progress and results they can get with their clients.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Well,
yeah.
In the works. Dale, anything else you want to add or touch on?
Not really. No, just as Brent said, there is quite a lot in the works. So we have this level 1 programming course, which will be the base and the prerequisite for all the further online training courses that we have. So the next level up from there will be so we'll have a hypertrophy, fat loss, strength, and sports performance courses that come online. So we'll have 4, and these will be conducted in person as well. Just in the COVID situation, it calms down a little bit. Also, another one that we're going in the works is a biomechanical advancement course as well. So as we sort of touched on there before, with getting people to back squat and deadlift, there's obviously flexibility implications and mobility implications that norms people have to have before they can do that. So one of the issues is that let's say you've got someone come to you and they've they've damaged ankles from a career playing basketball or netball, whatever it is, or a lot of PTs don't have the skills to deal with adhesions and scarring in the joint capsules or the soft tissues of the body. So what we'll teach in the biomechanical advancement course is the methods that you can use to quickly reestablish length and performance of these damaged tissues. So no matter who you have, they should be able to squat ass to grass effectively, or with sort of minimal adjustments to the the technique. I've got a long sort of background in soft tissue treatment, so some of these things that I can share will be a big help to clients, along with sort of the assessments that you need to use to work out where the restrictions are. So for example, a lot of people have restrictions and adhesions in the subscapularis, but very few people or PTs know how to assess that, nor how to stretch the subscap out properly, and this can really limit upper body movements, as an example. So that's something I'm particularly looking forward to sharing. But we're just we're really sort of excited, one, to be partnering up with Orphic, in taking our skills to a wider audience, but also hopefully to see COVID behind us, or the implications of COVID behind us, and get out teaching a lot of people. We're currently liaising and consulting with a lot of PTs at the moment. In the next couple of months, I've got a couple of appointments where we're going out to other gyms and doing weekend consultations for them, privately, to upskill the staff. So we're really looking forward to getting back into the thick of things.
Absolutely. And that's an important note. These courses do have in-person practical elements to them as well. It is not all online, correct?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously with the current situation, things are a little bit sticky in terms of in person, but these online courses, they're designed to take what you would learn in person online. So it's not just a lecture; it's the exact same experience that you would get in person in a course, with sort of offshoots and tangents. Well, hopefully we can apply that to online. So if you're in Perth, or even internationally, you should be able to access our teachings as you would if you could see us. But also too, we will be running these courses in person, at later dates when things come down a little bit more. Hopefully around Australia. So you've got the choice, whether you can see us online or in person or in both. Both is obviously good, but obviously we're also available for online consultations or even in-person consultations at the moment. So wherever you lay, don't be afraid to get in touch with either me or Brent. We're quite accessible on Facebook, and hopefully we can help you.
Yeah, where can people find you guys? Any last comments, thoughts, asks of the audience, or just where people can find you?
Yep, I mean, me, like I'm pretty accessible on Facebook, and there's not too many Dale Hansfords around, so just send me a message, me or Brent a message, and and we'll be able to sort you out.
Yeah, and same here. I mean, me and Dale are down at so Dale, alongside of making these courses, he works with me at my facility, Cosnett Training Systems. We're just based in Carrum Downs. So we've got a 700 meter facility here, gym, consult rooms, treatment rooms. So we can, like I said, Dale's going out to and myself going out to other gyms to do consults, or we can have people come in here as well. So, people in Melbourne, if they want to do educational based stuff with me and Dale, they can come to us here to our facility, or we can come to them and consult or online. And same thing, you can get us online on my personal Facebook. I'm like Brent Cosnett. Again, there's not many of those around. Or Cosnett Training Systems is the gym in my business here. So Cosnett Training Systems on Instagram and on Facebook. You can contact us there for personal training or just to get in contact with us.
Beautiful. Boys, thank you for doing this, and looking forward very much to the creation that we and you guys come up with in the coming months. Gotta stay tuned.
Yeah, thanks for having us on, Alex. It's great chat, and like as Dale said, very excited to be working with Orphic on these courses.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys.
All right.
See you, man.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned, because we now will be having short courses releasing from the beginning of 2021 approximately, and this is just the beginning of many. We realize that as a company, as an organization, but not even, let's get away from business, as an education provider, we want to deliver more than Cert 3s and 4s in fitness, right? Because that just gets the door. Now you're in the building. You've opened the door, now you're qualified, now you're in the building. Well, what about the people who are already in the building? The coaches, the trainers who are already established they're just in the industry, they did another course, they weren't satisfied, and that they want a higher level understanding, practical application of certain theories like programming, periodization, athletic development, total health and wellness, etc., etc. Well, we're going to be offering that through short courses. The barrier for entry is lower, price tag is not as high, duration and commitment is not as high, and there's no prerequisites. You could be the average person who's just a fixed fitness exercise enthusiast, curious person, and do the course. So really looking forward and energized to deliver that to you guys. So stay tuned. We're going to be delivering with various partners like these guys right here, which we're beginning with. And we'll be delivering that in the coming months. We're in November now. And if you're listening to this and it's 2021 or beyond, then it should be available now. Just go to our website, orphiceducation.com. Stay tuned to that and all our social media. And otherwise, if Cert 3 and 4 is something you guys are interested in, you guys like committed to the idea of doing a Cert 3 and 4, let us know. We'll see if you're a good fit for us. Otherwise, stay tuned to all our social media, and you guys will be able to see when we drop all these podcasts in the future every single Wednesday. I'm Alexander Emmanuel Sandalis. You guys can find me. I'm everywhere. I got my own podcast and setup that you guys can check out. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for supporting and listening, and I hope it was valuable. Talking everything program and periodization.